Hi, I'm Jennifer Carter, and thank you for joining me on a podcast for parents, teachers, and administrators. Today's conversation should be a good one, and I'm sure it's something on your mind. So let's get to it. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I think as any other teacher, I wear a lot of hats, and I am, my main job is a band teacher, but I don't even do that only at one school. I'm split between an elementary and a middle school. I love the perspective, honestly, I do. But it does get a little chaotic trying to balance the meetings and IEPs and stuff like that between the two schools. I teach at Canterbury Woods Elementary School and Frost Middle School, and both of those are in Fairfax County, Virginia, which is in Northern Virginia outside of DC, which is why I'm in the DC Guard. And oh, by the way, my name is Jacob Kohut. I forgot to say that. So, when I'm in school, I'm Dr. Kohut, and when I'm in the Guard, I'm Sergeant Kohut. When we're just having a conversation, just Jake, just Jake.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, what does your mother call you? That's what we really want to.
She calls me Jacob, but so that's when I'm in trouble. So anybody from back home in Saginaw, Michigan, they call me Jacob, but Jake is how I know people know me now. So
you have, I came across your story teaching band while you're doing this other important work. And I mean, I will say, like I've said this on the podcast, like I complain about the government and complain about, all that stuff, but I'm deeply appreciative of anyone who fights for my right to complain, So, when I saw this, I always have a deep regard and appreciation for people in the military. And so I was compelled by your dedication and the fact that you're, on this security detail at such a sensitive time in our history, what is that like? I mean, what are your colleagues saying? What do people, how do other people?
Yeah. Well, I think currently my colleagues over there who are fixing the Humvee, right, the fan belt, are wondering why I'm on the phone for so long. But because I didn't tell them, but my team who I work with every day, they think it's cool. Some of them give me a hard time and call me Hollywood now because I've done so many interviews, but no, it's all, I mean, it's good press. It's good for the Guard. Most people just think military, they think active duty, they think Army, but they forget about that element of, like the people who have civilian jobs and are citizen soldiers. And, it's almost like I would never compare myself to Batman because he's in much better condition than I am. And he's in a much higher tax bracket than me. But, when he sees the distress signal, he puts on his uniform and he goes out and fights crime. I don't really do that as well, but we're always ready with the boots and stuff.
How do you explain that with the kids?
I talk about it at the beginning of each year when we're doing the get to know yous. Honestly, that's my favorite day when we're doing like 10 things about you and you've got all the basic questions. And I promise you there's no student who is interesting on all 10 of those questions, but every student is interesting at least one question. There's like, wow, that is remarkable. I'm so glad I asked you that question because, it digs deeper and you find out. And then when I fill it out too, and I go last and I tell them about myself and I include this part of my life and, how important it is to me now. And what that means and what that is potentially gonna require. But to be honest, when I'm doing most of my drills, I'm a military musician. I do music for the military. This kind of stuff is not the norm. Not the norm. It's only in these cases of emergencies and stuff like that where all hands are on deck and I'm out here doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like an insurrection that's kind of a drop everything moment.
It is. And fortunately, because of the stuff that we have in place, it doesn't happen that often. So,
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's a great lesson to kind of tie into what you do, is this idea of like, we can all agree that that was not our shining moment, but we can also look at it as what happened after is an example of our shining moment, because
absolutely,
was able, like, we had all these things in place to make that event an isolated event, as opposed to the deterioration of the entire country, which you see in other.
Right. Yeah, no, you definitely saw all the backup forces come together in full effect, and like that's what the training is for. So that yesterday was boring and uneventful for us. That's the way we want it.
Yeah, I prefer, that's why, I mean, I appreciate what you do, but if it were up to me, you wouldn't have to even be in this position. So tell me how were you drawn to education? And then how were you drawn into military and education? Well, I'm always you can see the stuff that we talk about is really like the nitty gritty of being a parent, a teacher, an administrator. And your nitty gritty just is like, how do you balance that? Like, how do you make your kids understand? How do you go back if you miss several days and then you go back and you're like, okay, I was out fighting, an insurrection. Now we're just gonna have class again. Like,
right.
How do you balance that?
I hope I do it effectively. I really do. I don't know. I mean, today I lesson plan, but I don't lesson plan like I used to. Like I love having backup plans to backup plans. Okay, like have you ever coordinated with student teachers?
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen what they have to fill out?
Yes.
I mean, like I was doing that, when I student taught, I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And I get it. I do. It's kind of like when you're learning to read, you sound out the letters and you don't sound good reading, but you got to sound them out to learn how to read. And I get that. But, like I was thinking, man, if I do 30 years of filling out this form for every class I teach, I'm not going to teach. I'm not going to have a life. I'm not going to be happy. But I think it was a good step. But, like when it comes to lesson planning, like honestly, I'm a Post-it note guy. I take a Post-it note, or maybe just sometimes you need a larger Post-it note, and I start scribbling, and I'm like, yes, and I start working stuff around, and then I memorize it, or I'll bring the Post-it note up to the music stand, and like that. But like every class has its inherent structure to it, but how is it going to be different? How is it going to be memorable? I guess I'm like a home run teacher. I know I'm not going to hit a home run every time, but I'm going to try to hit a home run every time. I'm swinging for the fences. Mm-hmm. So, like today we had a class, and because I was in a Humvee, nobody's dictating what I can listen to in my Humvee. So I brought my own stereo, and my partner and I, we both love opera. We're listening to the best music in the history of opera. And, everyone probably thinks we're weird as they're walking by. But then I was like, you know what? Let's incorporate some of that into the class later today. And so, I just started putting some stuff together and some background. And I totally am going to do that. But see, that's another thing. Like, I know I didn't do the best job that I could. I want to do that assignment again because I already read the feedback from the kids. And I was like, that was good. But I know it could be better because I'm swinging for the fences, but it's a leap. It's a leap. I mean, we're talking about 13 and 14-year-olds listening to the most powerful opera on the planet that is going to might go over the most. Oh, I mean, it's from a lot of operas. Verdi's Tosca was one of them. One of them was a song from Foray, but it was in the operatic style. Sanson's Samson and Delilah. Forget the other one, but some of them were long. Like that Samson and Delilah one, it was the rendition by Jesse Norman from the 1980s. So if you go into the history books of performance practice for this singing stuff over the ages, there's like a different manner of of what's appropriate to sing. So like in the 80s, maybe you could get away with a certain kind of performance practice. You'd sing it a certain way. But if you sang it that way now, maybe I think like the purists would say, no, that's not okay. So there's like even this historic perspective within the recording that you're listening to. So, I mean, there's so many levels of depth that you can go into when you're talking about this stuff. So in this particular one, when I'm teaching like 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th graders, I'm teaching them to use a metronome. I want them to stay with a steady pulse. But, when you're talking about this best music, the pulse is out the window. I mean, it's just like I am leaning on this note a little bit longer. I'm slowing down and everyone's got to follow with me. But because you know what's coming, your expectation is slightly disrupted. And that is so powerful in music. Like you probably just thought, wow, you were just speaking like maybe you were having a stroke, but in music, that's like the best thing that you can have,
That's right. I mean, and what do your kids, how do they respond to music, or when you explain these intricacies and these little details, how do they respond to it?
Well, so I was explaining this to somebody just this morning that I don't have a name for this approach, but it's almost like a hill approach. I don't know. I need a name for it. Maybe you can help me come up with a name of it. But
right,
like
let's work on that.
I know that during the height of that lesson, I'm going to go over some of the kids' heads. I might go over most of the kids' heads.
So I think I try to anticipate what the top portion of the class will be able to absorb. And I try to think about what the most basic part of the class is going to need. And I try to then like escalate up to that top portion, starting at the very lowest, so that I can kind of have something for everybody, starting with, I will lose almost everybody by the end of this, but we're going to start at a level that everybody is going to participate at. You know what I mean? And so by the end of it, everybody has gotten engaged to the point where, to the maximum amount that they can. So I don't know what a name. I don't have a name for that, but I try to do that in a number of classes, especially where there is just a really wide spectrum of different types of students in there.
That makes sense. If
Does that make sense?
About, like Bloom's taxonomy, right? Like the basic is memorization, and then you work your way up to application. And so if you expose everybody to the basics and give them opportunities to show what they can do at the top end of that, kids that may not typically know what's going on can still have success depending on the day and on the lesson. So I mean, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, okay. I guess it is an application of Bloom's taxonomy within a class, within a single, because I normally think of that as a progression per student, but I think it does apply here as going through that basic to advanced within a lesson. Yeah.
Because at the centers that I have, that's what we do. That's why we do project-based learning. I worked at a school where all of the learning we did was progressive. It was like very, very progressive in a lot of ways. It wasn't like, what is that? That school in England where kids get to choose what they learn every day. It wasn't that loose, but it was like kind of loose. And the whole idea is that, everyone can be successful at a different aspect of a project. And so you present everything with multi-layers and multi-levels of learning throughout the lesson so that kids can hop in and understand where they are. And you really do, it increases their ability to learn because you're not starting from the same jumping board. You're starting from different jump off points depending on where the individual kid is. So it's a great way to teach. Hey there. If you've gotten this far into the episode, chances are that you really like what you're listening. I'm going to ask you to press pause and share this particular episode with 5 people that you think would really enjoy listening to it. I'm also going to ask that you subscribe to our podcast so that you don't miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening. And now let's get back to the conversation.
Yeah. I was really fascinated and humbled by the responses I got back. And those are my favorite kinds of projects because, first of all, it's an easy A in the book for the kids who are concerned about that stuff. Okay, we just are going to participate. Let's not worry about the right answer, right? There is not a right answer here.
Right.
And then just saying, what are you noticing? We're going to start there with that kind of open-ended question. What are you noticing? Not how are you noticing the instrumentation and not the specifics, but it's just that basic level. And then allowing the kids to progress through some of the things by having a conversation after they've written a response to it, a very open-ended response. And then they can go back and they can edit and add if they want to. But finding out that, some of the kids really had strong connections to the storylines behind the music because it's sung. It's not in English, but there are subtitles in some of the cases. And then I gave them backstory of like, okay, they were exiled from France and they're in America at this point. And, this lover's just gone away. She's remorseful. She's singing about it. Basic plot in one sentence. And what are the emotions that she's feeling? And some kids really lock into that. Others lock into the power in the instrumentation. Some kids are interested in the emotions of the voice, some the pacing and the color of sound, so it was like, here's your open-ended thing. Everybody's going to have a right answer. Everyone's answer is going to be really reflective of what they're hearing. And that's kind of like one of those revealing questions, like what I was talking about at the beginning of the year. They fill out this survey, everyone asks the same questions because you get such different answers. You really find out who they are. And some of the kids that struggle on their instruments a little bit have fantastic answers that really indicate that they're listening at a deeper level, which is awesome. That's like such a strength for them,
Mm-hmm. So do you teach, is it band or is it orchestra? Because it sounds more like orchestra.
I teach band.
Interesting.
No. See, I think I teach band, but I'm a musician. I'm a musician, right? And I think that the highest level of musical expression happens with the human voice. I think that's the mother tongue of our understanding of emotion. You are picking up on my emotion. My partner here that was during the day shift, he speaks Spanish as that's his native tongue. And last night I was listening to him. I overheard a conversation of him talking to his mom in Puerto Rico. And I don't speak Spanish, but I could understand the emotions, right? Because you're speaking in a certain way, because those emotions are kind of at this primal level.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, as instrumentalists, we're trying to imitate that primal understanding that we can feel at the vocal level. And so if even though I'm teaching wind instruments mostly, we need to listen to the voice to understand how to phrase and express emotions. Because if we're only listening to the instruments around us, that's good. We do too much of that, though. We're limiting ourselves. So we got to listen to everything.
I wish you and I were teaching at the same time in the same building, because you have a really literary perspective on how to teach music, because that's the same way that I teach literature. It's which word taps into that emotion, which idea, or which like the connotation and denotation of words, and how you can jump, but you can leap. And what is when you jump say versus when you leap? It's not very much of a difference, but like how you leap it. Like I jumped full on into this project feels very different than I leaped into this project, right? Like there's definitely an emotional catalyst behind the words. And I don't necessarily know if parents understand that when kids take band and things like that, that's what they're learning. They're learning how to read.
Well, in most cases, they're not. In too many cases, we're not. And I am guilty of this as well, because we're so fixated on these basic things. it's like really like anybody who's holding a musical instrument should be a gymnast or a ballerina, not a track star.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I love watching track. I do. But there's one objective: be the fastest, be the go the farthest.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in kind of gymnastics or ballet or figure skating or something like that, there's a huge amount of physicality, but there's a huge amount of humanity in their motions, and that's why we connect to them, and that's why it's more subtle. And you have to have the strength, but you also have to have the beauty. And too often we get lost in the strength portion of things, and that's very important. You got to practice your scales. You got to do some breathing exercises.
Yeah.
But
so, like with Samson and Delilah, you were saying that you have them listen to that opera. That is prime real estate for middle school, because that's when they're starting to like boys and girls. And they know what all the emotions are, and no one's gonna say so much to embarrass themselves, except for that one kid, and that one kid. But they're going to be able to talk and share. So you're like, Samson had this girlfriend, and she was trying to get him caught up in some stuff, and this is the whole opera about it. And you frame it in a way that they know. And then they'll tell you where they are with that. They may not be thinking about sex, but they're thinking about boys and girls. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Have you talked to anybody this year about the difference that the chat box makes in virtual learning? I mean, I'm getting these chat box fiends, which is great. I mean, it really is, like, because I mean, it's like it's almost adding these kids who wouldn't speak. I feel like they wouldn't speak in class. They're okay with typing it in. And I'm getting a different level of participation. I still don't have participation from certain kids, and that is what it is. But I feel like that's awesome because I'm talking. They don't really want to raise their hand and say it out there, but they're just going to put it in the chat box, and there it is. And I'm able to read it as I'm teaching. Mm-hmm. And I've loved it because it's like it's real time. They're commenting on what I'm saying without this chaos of interruptions when we're talking, because we're teaching and like, I don't want them to talk. But even in the classroom, some of those interjections are so spot on and appropriate. They make me laugh out loud.
Oh yeah.
But so the chat box thing is really interesting. And like the Samson and Delilah, I'm definitely going to elaborate on that more the next opportunity I have, because I think that the kids locked onto that. We didn't dig deep. We were trying to do some deep listening, but it was pretty rudimentary, So I was given a very quick summary of the context. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's it's interesting. Back when I was training and going through like my master's program and stuff like that, one of the strategies that I learned was the silent discussion, where everyone would take out a piece of paper and you would ask a provocative question, and they would write their response on a piece of paper, and you would have them in a square. They would literally put their desk so everyone was facing, and then they would rotate the paper around and respond.
That's
and what
cool.
They didn't realize is they were writing an essay and they were practicing writing. And so the chat box is the same idea, but it's modernized. It's not a piece of paper anymore.
Yeah.
So definitely, in terms of a teaching strategy, it's definitely not surprising that kids are more responsive. But you just have to come up with more provocative things that everyone's going to have an opinion about, Like, is Samson more like Kanye or more like Drake, or I don't know. That's exhausted my whole list of people I know that are contemporary to them.
Right. Me too.
But, but yeah, I think like those are some of the things that, I tried in class and that I even do with our little kids, because I've taught everything from preschool up through college. So I take an experimental approach. Everyone's my guinea pig. So if I have a class, then you are who I'm experimenting on. But it sounds like you are, because you're saying you want to meditate and reflect on stuff. It sounds like you're a little bit like that too. Like you're looking at like, how do I experiment? How do I get?
Oh, absolutely. That's that whole swinging for the fence thing. You know, I'm always trying to tinker with it to make it better. Mm-hmm. And I fail so much. You know, I do. I make mistakes all the time. And I tell the kids right up front about it. Hey, I was trying to do this and it didn't work, you know, and that's okay. I've been better about that in the last couple of years, just being okay with the whole failing thing. But, you know, I think you got to experiment with your teaching to get those better results because, you know, education is always evolving. Society's changing. Mm-hmm. I think the biggest mistake that teachers make is that I hear us say is like, well, when I went to school, it was like this. Well, first of all, I don't know how accurate my memory of school really was. You know, was it really like that? Or did 8-year-old me think it was like that?
This is true. Yeah, that's
the
true.
Paradigm shift.
Yeah. And, you know, they're living in a world that's, you know, so, and we're preparing them for a world. I have no idea what these kids are going to do. I literally have no idea when I'm done with them what their adulthood is going to look like. You know, it's so interesting. When we started, you were like, what do I have to talk about? And I was like, I'm sure you have something to talk about. Because
I do. I have so much to talk about. I just don't know if anybody wants to hear it. That is the thing. You know, I have thoughts, you know, but I'm like, definitely not within the scope of any of the articles that have been written. Are we talking about the depths of education and culture that we just covered right now? So I'm like, who would know that I want to talk about those things? I love to talk about those things.
But I knew, because if you're teaching on a Humvee, then clearly you're passionate, right? You're passionate about teaching and you're passionate about your content area, in my opinion.
Yes, it's I don't know if it's a healthy obsession or not, and I don't know if it's just about teaching. It's a thing. It's like about music. Like, you know, like I do think it's important to fulfill obligations, to connect with kids, but also, you know, I sold my soul to music a long time ago. So
great.
You know, whoa. I'm all in.
I love that. But anyway, I mean, I will talk your head off. I meant for this to be rather short, like, because I wanted to be mindful of your time. And I know you're out doing
it's okay. I kind of prepped for this just to kind of keep it open-ended if possible, because, you know, I figured, you know, we might have a great conversation or it might be short. So.
Well, hopefully you feel like this was a great conversation. I know
with the podcast that it can be open-ended. I do. I've been telling, you know, I've been talking to a lot of reporters lately, and I'm like, I wonder how long this is going to take, but it's fascinating how genuinely interested I am with some of the human beings that I'm connecting with. Or
well, I'm all about teaching, and when I find someone that seems to be a passionate teacher, like the teacher that knitted the mittens for Bernie Sanders, I may ask her what's her deal, because I don't necessarily, again, it's for parents, teachers, and administrators, and I have all kinds of listeners. So I always want everyone to understand everyone else's perspective, you know. And for me, when I come across teachers that can give a perspective that's valuable for parents and administrators to hear, or a parent that administrators and teachers need to hear, or an administrators that parents and teachers need, then for me, it's going to be a great conversation.
Right.
So that's our conversation for today. I hope you found some information that was interesting, or a perspective that you hadn't thought of. If you like what you heard, or even if you have some feedback, put a comment in our comment section. Be sure to like our page and make sure that you subscribe so that you can hear when the next video comes out. Thanks so much again for joining us.